In 1982, a billionaire banker disappeared. 9 days later, he was found dead beneath a bridge in London. What investigators discovered in his pockets would turn a banking scandal into one of the strangest financial mysteries in modern history. On the morning of June 18th, 1982, a passerby walking along the River Thames noticed something strange beneath the Blackfriars Bridge. A body hung from the bridge's iron framework. When the police arrived, the scene immediately raised questions. The dead man was dressed in an expensive tailored suit. His pockets contained thousands of dollars in cash spread across multiple currencies. Bricks and pieces of masonry had been stuffed inside his clothing, and the victim wasn't an ordinary businessman. His name was Roberto Calvi. He was one of the most powerful bankers in Europe, the chairman of Banco Ambrosiano, a man so deeply connected to money, politics, and power that newspapers had given him a nickname, God's Banker. At first glance, the case appeared simple. Authorities quickly concluded that Calvi had taken his own life. Case closed, but almost immediately, people began asking uncomfortable questions. Why had one of Europe's richest bankers fled his country days earlier? Why was he carrying cash in multiple currencies? How had he ended up beneath the Blackfriars Bridge? And perhaps, most importantly, what happened to the missing $1.3 billion? Because long before Roberto Calvi died, a $1 billion financial disaster was already unfolding. And that disaster may explain everything. Just 48 hours before Calvi's body was discovered, his financial empire had collapsed. To understand why that mattered, you first have to understand what Banco Ambrosiano actually was. Founded in the late 1800s, Banco Ambrosiano had grown into one of Italy's largest and most respected private banks. It financed major businesses, managed the wealth of influential families, and handled billions of dollars in assets. To ordinary Italians, it had represented stability. And at the top of that empire sat Roberto Calvi. Under his leadership, the bank expanded aggressively across Europe and built an enormous network of international companies. On the surface, Banco Ambrosiano looked unstoppable. Behind the polished image, however, investigators later discovered an incredibly fragile financial structure. For years, Calvi had built a vast network of offshore companies, foreign transactions, and complex financial arrangements stretching across multiple countries. As long as money kept flowing, nobody asked too many questions. Then regulators began looking closer. When investigators finally examined the bank's accounts, they discovered something astonishing. Roughly $1.3 billion could not be properly accounted for. The money hadn't simply been misplaced, it appears to have vanished into a maze of offshore companies and financial arrangements. And investigators would soon discover that the trail led somewhere completely unexpected: the Vatican. Suddenly, this wasn't just a banking scandal, it was becoming an international mystery. News of the crisis spread rapidly, confidence collapsed, pressure mounted, authorities launched investigations, journalists swarmed the story. People close to the bank began attracting attention. One of Calvi's closest associates later died after falling from a fourth floor window under circumstances that generated significant public interest. Meanwhile, Calvi himself disappeared. He obtained false documents, left Italy, and became the target of an international search. 9 days later, he was found dead beneath the Blackfriars Bridge. The official explanation sounded simple. The reality did not. Because the deeper investigators looked, the stranger the story became. To understand why this case became so controversial, you have to understand why Roberto Calvi was called the God's Banker. His bank maintained unusually close financial ties with the Vatican, officially known as the Institute for the Works of Religion. The Vatican Bank operated under a unique set of circumstances. It existed in an independent sovereign state. Its operations were often shielded from the scrutiny faced by ordinary commercial banks. For Calvi, this relationship proved extremely valuable. Over time, Banco Ambrosiano developed an enormous network of offshore companies linked to locations such as Panama, Luxembourg, and the Bahamas. Money flowed through these entities in increasingly complex ways. Investigators later alleged that many of these companies existed primarily on paper. Large loans moved through the network, guarantees were issued, funds were transferred, and the financial structure became so complicated that even experienced regulators struggled to understand it. As investigators followed the money, theories multiplied. Journalists, prosecutors, and historians proposed different explanations for where the missing funds ultimately went. Some suggested political operations, others pointed towards hidden financial networks. Many details remain disputed to this day. What is not disputed is the scale of the problem was enormous. And as the investigation expanded, another name repeatedly appeared: P2. Officially, P2 was a Masonic lodge. Unofficially, it became one of the most controversial organizations in modern Italian history. When police eventually uncovered its membership lists, they discovered a remarkable collection of names: military officers, intelligence officials, politicians, business leaders, media executives. Some observers describe P2 as a secret network alongside the official institutions of the Italian state. Whether that description is fair remains debated. What isn't debated is that P2 possessed extraordinary influence, and Roberto Calvi was a member. Suddenly, the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano looked far bigger than a banking scandal. The story now involved hidden networks, political influence, and powerful individuals. But investigators weren't finished because another theory soon emerged: organized crime. Some investigators believed criminal organizations may have suffered substantial financial losses as Banco Ambrosiano collapsed. If true, the implications were enormous. When billions of dollars move through hidden financial networks, eventually someone starts asking questions. And those questions can become dangerous. The deeper the investigators dug, the stranger the case became. Instead of one convincing explanation, they found three. Each theory explained part of the mystery. None explained everything. Theory number one focused on personal collapse. This was the original conclusion reached by the British investigators. By June 1982, Roberto Calvi's world had collapsed. His bank was insolvent. Authorities in Italy were investigating him. The press had turned him into a face of one of Europe's biggest financial scandals. He had fled his own country using false documents. Supporters of this theory argue that the pressure simply became unbearable. To them, Calvi wasn't murdered. He was a man watching his life's work collapse around him. But critics quickly pointed out several unanswered questions. Why travel all the way to London? Why was he carrying thousands of dollars in multiple currencies? Why were bricks hidden inside his clothing? And why did later forensic examinations cast doubt on the original ruling? Those questions kept the case alive. Theory number two focused on the missing money. Investigators knew one thing for certain: more than $1 billion had disappeared. Money on that scale rarely vanishes without affecting powerful people. According to this theory, Calvi knew exactly where at least some of the missing funds had gone. If he talked, he could expose businessmen, financiers, and criminal organizations who had trusted him with enormous sums of money. Some investigators suspected that organized crime groups had suffered massive financial losses when Banco Ambrosiano collapsed. If those allegations were true, Calvi may have been less valuable alive than dead. Years later, several individuals with the alleged mafia links were prosecuted over the case. Ultimately, none were convicted. The theory remains possible but unproven. The third theory is the broadest and perhaps the most unsettling. Roberto Calvi wasn't connected to just one powerful institution, he was connected to many. Banco Ambrosiano, the Vatican Bank, members of the P2 Lodge, prominent political and business figures. By the time his bank collapsed, Calvi possessed years of knowledge about complicated financial arrangements involving influential people. According to supporters of this theory, Calvi had become a liability. If he returned to Italy and cooperated with investigators, the consequences could extend far beyond a failed bank. The bridge itself added another layer to the mystery. Some researchers have pointed out that the name Blackfriars resembled a term associated with the members of P2. Others dismiss this as a coincidence. Like so much in this case, there is no definitive answer. And that's what makes Roberto Calvi's story so unusual. Every theory explains some of the evidence. Every theory leaves important questions unanswered. More than 40 years later, historians, journalists, and investigators cannot still agree on which explanation comes closest to the truth. New investigations challenge the original ruling. Questions continue to surround the circumstances of Calvi's death. Attention increasingly shifted towards the possibility that he had not acted alone. Yet, even after decades of investigation, a definitive answer still remained out of reach. Several suspects eventually stood trial. None were ultimately convicted. No universally accepted explanation emerged. No final confession appeared. No hidden ledger surfaced. The central mystery remained intact, and perhaps that's why the story continues to fascinate people today. Most financial scandals end with numbers, balance sheets, court rulings, paper trails. This one ended with a body beneath a bridge. $1 billion missing, a collapsed banking empire, and decades of unanswered questions. Roberto Calvi built one of Europe's most powerful financial institutions. Then everything fell apart. $1 billion vanished. His bank collapsed. He fled his country. 9 days later, he was found dead beneath the Blackfriars Bridge. And after more than 40 years, one question remained unanswered. What really happened to the God's banker? If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more and click the video on your screen to explore another decision that changed history.